This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is January 22nd, 2026.
I'm Scott Lunenbaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, Mark Carney gave a speech heard round the world, and some other stuff happened. Doesn't feel like anything else mattered. It's been a wild week, hey? Like, Trump, we went from World War III imminent starting in Greenland to Trump angry posting from the shitter in Davos in embarrassment.
Yeah, well, it's been a while of January. Do you believe the Venezuela thing was like 2.5 weeks ago? It feels like it's been 4 months.
I thought that's just what 40 feels like.
No, that's just what 2026 feels like.
Well, we got some things that aren't global politics to talk about, so we'll get into those in a hot second after you go to patreon.com/politicos and support the podcast. And then you can get access to the Slack and keep up with the, take a minute news that's coming out. One patron said very kindly, and I think accurately, that they don't need to go to social media as much because they have the Slack to keep up with news. Because there are still some social media brain people in our Slack, which we love, posting all the latest stories. So it's kind of like a curated, healthier social media for you, if I can sell it that way. Let's start here in British Columbia. A little bit of news this week. BC has announced it is delaying another piece of legislation. The proposed changes to the Heritage Conservation Act are going to a further consultation following a lot of pushback from municipalities and business and development communities to what the government has been trying to figure out what to do with for about 3 or 4 years now. This is a bill that basically regulates how do you deal with historically important aspects of the province when you are, addressing digging up your land or cutting trees down. Like, if you discover something of archaeological importance, what does the law say? That law is quite old and definitely in need of updates, everyone agrees, but no one agrees how.
Yeah, I mean, just this past week, there was a story doing the rounds about, I believe it was an owner in Kamloops, might have been Kelowna, one of the cities that starts with a K in the interior.
Caramios, I don't know.
Who got hit with a six-figure bill after finding some remains on their property. Also, this was one of the major factors in delaying the rebuilding of Lytton, where doing archaeological work there after the town burned down took priority over rebuilding, which, was compliant with the law, but was, I think, pretty objectively a misallocation of priorities on that. So there's definitely stuff to change on there.
Yeah, the law is out of date. It can definitely improve on both sides. I think there is a way to balance the importance of preserving archaeological and historical artifacts and do it in a more efficient way while also facilitating development and construction. I mean, one of the simple realities that's not really discussed in the stories is if the province cares, and we should, because collectively we have a value of our history, not to speak of which is largely Indigenous First Nations history that is buried beneath our feet, we have a collective responsibility to pay for it. So, if the province cares, foot the bill and things will move faster.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. The financial burden should be taken off individual landowners on stuff like this. That was also one of the problems with Lytton rebuilding, was fighting over who was going to pay for it, whether or not the fire insurance was going to cover that as part of the rebuilding costs. But yeah, hardly seems fair to make individual owners pay for this sort of thing. Like, it really should be the case that if this is a provincial priority, the province can chip in, and if they're not willing to chip in, well, then it's clearly not that important to them on it. Not clear if that's actually in the updated Heritage Conservation Act. Part of that is there hasn't been a lot of transparency on what the changes were going to be. Bunch of consultations gone back and forth, but you mentioned the pushback from municipalities. Some of that, as reported, I believe it was in the Sun, at least going off memory, I believe it was, that city managers got briefings by the government but had to sign NDAs and couldn't talk to the elected officials they are in theory accountable to about what the upcoming changes the province was proposing at the time. So all in all, it's been a mess of a process that has created a lot of room for political pushback on this.
One of the challenges with these consultations, and this happened with the Land Act as well, which is also kind of sitting in limbo, is the government, I think, is doing the right thing in trying to update these laws, bring them in compliance with DRIPA and the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, do the right consultations. But our legislative system says technically you can't put a draft bill out there until it's tabled in the legislature. So our Westminster approach is kind of tying, at least the government is using this as an excuse, tying their hands into how they can talk about it in advance of actually tabling a bill. And I don't know, I feel
just kind of yeah, there's a parliamentary tradition on that and everything, but come on, that's a load of bullshit, because governments all the time do work ahead of time in public-facing communications about what's expected. And, even if they don't release the, literal word-for-word draft ahead of time, people will be told what the direction this is going and kind of what the key aspects of it are. And, so far what we've seen on a lot of these bills is that there's a lot of closed door discussion, and it kind of gets presented afterwards as a fait accompli, which is not a good way to build political trust and buy-in.
Yeah, it seems like one of the debates in this bill was a definition or updating the definition of intangible cultural values, possibly including more ephemeral things like songs, ceremonies, food, and traditions within them, which everyone kind of went, I don't know how that would actually work. And now the government is saying, we're not going to touch that definition, which, is the back and forth. And I don't have strong opinions on it. I do note that the delay is being called out by Judith Sayers, one of the co-chairs of the First Nations Heritage Conservation Working Group, and some other Indigenous groups who are frustrated that they've been promised change, and yet everything's kind of stuck in limbo as the government gets cold feet. You can't consult something to death. Eventually, you gotta do something. And it's important to get it right, of course. But, this has been in consultation for several years now. Where are they going with it? It doesn't seem like they know.
Yeah, that is definitely a good question. And, I will agree on the intangible heritage issues. It's that opens up a can of worms. If you're a lawyer, how are you supposed to, provide clients with, a reasonable estimate of what is going to be covered by this? Because, if it's intangible, it's pretty hard to quantify, and that opens up just unreasonably large amounts of uncertainty around all of it.
So good luck, government, on figuring out what you're going to do on that. So they don't see urgency in updating the Heritage Conservation Act, but they do see urgency in addressing extortion claims in Surrey, as EB has kind of called out the head of a task force set up by local police and the province to address extortion issues, who recently had a press conference, I think it was, where they kind of downplayed it as not a crisis.
Yeah, this is usually it's the Ontario cops that are saying something stupid and getting a bunch of blowback from politicians on stuff. You don't see that as much in BC, which is, probably to the police in BC's credit, but not a great look for the police in this one. I don't think we've actually talked much about this issue, if ever, on the pod, but it's quite a issue in Surrey, and it's been a growing concern for the last year or two. And even just in the past couple weeks, there have been a raft of shootings that have been tied to the extortion rackets being run in Surrey. Thankfully, most of those have targeted businesses and houses rather than people, and there's been no fatalities as of yet, as far as I know. But there is a definite problem here, and an unacceptable level of violence in the community.
Yeah, the BC RCMP Assistant Commissioner John Brewer, who's head of the BC Extortion Task Force, was basically asked about these cases in Surrey. He said, "There's not a crisis." These are comments he's apologized for and retracted, but just for the context, what's happening out there with drug overdoses, that's a crisis. People are dying. This is a threat to public safety, absolutely, and I take it very seriously. And it's basically like nitpicking around the word crisis, which granted is a political and kind of vague, non-quantifiable term. And so this whole debate is kind of stupid in my view. Like, he probably shouldn't have said that. That's not helpful. But like, I don't know. It's a weird one. Like, I'm not trying to dismiss the issue. It's just like, I don't know. It's a weird one.
I think this is... I was mostly interested in talking about this less for the individual comments of the police officer in question, as, although one may certainly have issues with that. It's more about kind of flagging this as an issue that, we haven't talked about before, but is one that is politically quite salient in Surrey. We have upcoming municipal elections, which I'm sure this will feature heavily in.
Someone should start a podcast to talk about those.
Yeah. But you can get all that on the Gambia Report.
Haven't heard of it.
But also, Surrey's a battleground region where the next BC election outcome is going to be in large part decided. It's even showing up in federal immigration politics. There's a story, I think before the holidays, regarding the people that have been arrested who are not Canadian citizens, claiming filing refugee claims to avoid deportation over serious criminality here, and that's become part of the federal political debate over the immigration system. So overall, this is an issue that is maybe very local in its actual on-the-ground impacts, but has significant political impact outside of the municipality of Surrey that's going to be felt.
Yeah, and this is where I think EB is, feels the pressure and knows he needs to step in. Like, the premier shouldn't really be calling for head of police task force, individual ones, to resign. That's getting a bit straight into the operational side of policing that there's usually supposed to be a line in. But he understands, right, in this situation, he needs those votes, and his voters are concerned and are frustrated, and he's probably also frustrated.
Yeah, I do think Canada should probably do some revisiting of just how firm that line is. Like, part of the problem with the whole convoy thing in Ottawa was that, the police just weren't doing their job when it came to enforcing the law. Like, it should never have gotten to the point where the Emergencies Act needed to be enacted, but
which the Federal Court of Appeal agreed with you today.
Yeah, earlier this week. But really, someone should have been able to call up the OPP and Ottawa police and told them, get their heads on straight and do their damn jobs and get this occupation dealt with before it turned into a multi-week fiasco. And there's very good reasons why we don't want politicians handling like the day-to-day operational aspects of the police. Doesn't mean there isn't a role for political oversight on some of this stuff, and this might not be the absolute best case for reform on this particular story, but overall, I think there's a solid argument that Canada has overcorrected on the matter and should probably revisit this and restructure it somewhat.
I'd love if any listener has a book suggestion to just read a deep dive history into policing scandals in Canada, or even just City of Vancouver, because I know there have been so many, and I just want to track the trajectory of this debate over time just to wrap my head around it a little bit better. But I know Vancouver's history, it was like the mayor of the day was either friendly with the cops or at war with the cops, and it was, I'm talking the 1920s and earlier.
That's a story I hear for a lot of municipal politics just everywhere.
And those days were kind of on the opposite end of the pendulum. So where's the balance? Who's to say? The balance for the BC Conservative Party is being set with its new leadership rules that have come out this past week. We now know when we will have the new leader of the official opposition in BC, May 30th, which is coming up relatively soon. Yeah,
they felt like they kind of dragged their feet of getting some of this up and running. Some of it, though, kind of understandable, as the party's never actually run a leadership race of this magnitude and note. Nevertheless, they have struck the leadership committee. The committee's come out with those rules, and like I said, leadership's going to be announced on May 30th. Candidates have up until February 15th to file their paperwork to run, and the prospective voters in the leadership race have up until April 18th to become Conservative Party members to vote.
The leadership candidates will need to raise $110,000 to enter the race. That is split into deposits of $10,040, or that is split into payments of $10,000, $40,000 on April 1st and $60,000 on April 18th. And they will need to fork over a $20,000 compliance deposit. They'll also need to get 250 signatures from members in 5 different regions, and voting will be preferential ballot, as most leadership races are, using the fairly common but not universal 100-point per riding allocation.
With the asterisk that if there's less than 100 people voting in the riding only gets that number of votes, so you can't really juice it by only having 3 people vote in a riding.
The 3 Conservatives in East Van don't get an out-proportioned power. And there's a $2 million expense limit, which is pretty reasonable. The fee is interesting. The $110,000. We talked about how much Emily Lowen raised in her leadership race, and it was under that, even though she was the most successful of the Greens in their race. Different audiences for the 2 different races with different depth of pockets.
And, potential membership bases. There's a party that got, mid-40s of the vote, just has a lot more potential donors and members to vote for than a party that got 6%, 8% roughly.
Yeah. I haven't skimmed these rules thoroughly as well. One of the key things I have noticed is there's no real appeal process. Basically, they say all decisions of the leadership committee, returning officer, and board of directors are final and not subject to any appeal or judicial, or any process of any court or tribunal or other body or authority. And that language is kind of repeated in a few spots. So we'll see if, these rules, which haven't been tested before, generate any interesting conflicts that anyone wants to adjudicate, or if they have a coherent enough party that everyone just gets along or is willing to go along to get along in this situation, which I can barely say with a straight face.
Yeah, the more interesting thing for me, although I definitely agree that that no appeals thing potentially has a chance of causing some problems, depending on how much controversy there ends up being, or whether someone gets disqualified or whatnot, is it's a pretty short leadership race. We're most of the way through what feels like an eternal January, but May 30th, that's not that far off. It's a much tighter and quicker run than the BC Liberal leadership race was the last couple times. Those stretched, the better part of a year? And considering Rustad only resigned on December 4th, it's just a little over 6 months, including the time to strike the leadership committee and figure out the rules for this thing. So that's I'd say a positive sign, because I think those other leadership races just stretched out too long, and it became this slog of a thing. The party couldn't focus on doing the actual job of opposition work, and the new leader had less time to introduce themselves to British Columbians and get into that premier leading role. So, there's always a fine line on how much do you give time for the contest to have people hash this stuff out, figure out what direction you want the party to go, versus making that decision in a timely manner so you can get to work on the real work of opposition politics.
Yeah, this isn't as fast as the federal Liberal race was last year. In that one, I just have the timeline in front of me. Justin Trudeau resigned on January 6th, and they picked their new leader, Mark Carney, on March 9th.
Yeah. Now, there were, some international crises to deal with, and it was for a prime minister. But
I don't think you can go faster than that.
Yeah, it's roughly on par with what the BC NDP's quasi-leadership race that they...
Coronation.
It was looking like a leadership race and turned into a coronation. But in that one, Horgan resigns on June 28th, and they were going to have a new leader, in theory, in place by December 3rd. But with everything that happened there that we don't need to go over in great detail, EB ended up being acclaimed on October 21st. So, kind of similar timeline on that.
Yeah. This will be a race. We already have 6 candidates declared that we talked about last week. Daryl Jones has announced he is having an announcement very soon. This is the former Save on Foods president.
Yeah, at a banquet hall in Surrey. So, it's pretty clear how this is going to shape up.
He has darylforbc.ca is already registered.
Yeah, and as the Twitter handle he posted the announcement under is also Daryl4BC. So, not subtle on what this is all pointing to.
We're also expecting Harman Bangu and Carrie Lynn Findlay to possibly put their name forward. And then there's a few others. Andrew Wilkinson, former BC Liberal leader, is listed as a potential candidate on Wikipedia.
Yeah, well, Wikipedia will grab pretty much everyone. We were looking a week or two ago over the the federal NDP's leadership race, and they had Thomas Mulcair as a potential but eventually declined candidate, which really means he was never really considering it, but somebody asked him in an interview at one point, so someone threw it on Wikipedia.
So we'll follow this race, obviously, as it shapes up. I don't think we need to get too much more into it for now, but yeah, they could have gone a little bit tighter, but I think going any longer than this would have been foolish. So at least this gives them some time to hopefully differentiate themselves. I think the speed of the federal Liberal race kind of undermined anyone's ability to outshine Mark Carney, who kind of came in with momentum and just steamrolled it. But although I don't think a longer race would have changed that much.
No, if anything, I could have seen it turn into even more of a coronation, as Freeland and Gould really, neither of them had any juice, and I can't even remember who else was through their
Frank Bayless.
Frank Bayless. Yeah, the fact that I could not remember Frank Bayless's name tells you a lot about the effectiveness of the Frank Bayless candidacy.
Oh, poor guy. I was just on the Wikipedia page, which is how I knew that name. Let's keep talking about Mark Carney as we turn our eyes nationally and internationally. He had a pretty darn good week over in Davos, Switzerland at the World Economic Forum. Unlike Pierre Poilievre, he is happy to attend. And
well, it's like home turf for him.
Exactly. He got to see all his friends and give a really big speech that got a standing ovation and reprinted in every English newspaper in the world. It sounds like. Yeah,
both of which are pretty uncommon for the World Economic Forum. Don't think there's been a lot of standing ovations, and most of those pass without anyone's speeches getting global coverage and just reprinting the speech rather than just talking about it in the coverage.
So we probably don't need to talk a lot about the speech itself.
I imagine everybody has heard the coverage of it or read it or seen it themselves at this point. But it was definitely noteworthy in a few ways.
Yeah.
Mostly, I think, for taking what had been a lot of subtext and just making it text. The vibes of the last year kind of got put into words in the speech, with the stuff about it not being a transition but a rupture in geopolitics and international relations. And I don't have the words in front of me right now, but a more take the world as it is approach.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it has all of that, like, stark honesty that we haven't seen as clearly from world leaders. But then I still can't help but leave reading it with this sense that there's still a lot of inherent contradictions in it, right? It's everything is different now. And so what are we doing? More tax cuts, more efforts to get mining in, and just like
there's
working
trade diversification, which is important. I think more notably was what Carney has termed variable geometry, which he came up with that one rather than the speechwriters at PMO.
He says he wrote this speech himself.
Yeah. Well,
which is probably why it was better than a lot of others. No offense to the speechwriters, but I think they can get overcrafted.
It's hard to think of a lot of great Canadian oration that has persisted in the cultural memory over the years the way you can with certain American presidents and British prime ministers. Just not the political culture of Canada in many ways. But circling back to the variable geometry bit, the bit more of we're kind of going to build coalitions of nations on a case-by-case, issue-by-issue basis. And that is more new than the general economic sovereignty plan stuff that we've been hearing about for the last year or so.
Yeah, it's definitely the most clear picture we have of a foreign policy approach in quite a long time. Trudeau wanted to say Canada is back, and he was definitely eager to participate in, global institutions, but it wasn't clear what he was doing there. It's I was happy to see him go, but then we didn't bring anything to the table.
Yeah, in retrospect, I think it is clear what he was doing there, which was showing up to give speeches and appear on the photo ops, but...
Which he did at Davos with Katy Perry in arm.
Yeah.
Again this year.
But, the last 10 years of Canadian foreign policy has been a lot of speechifying, talking about values and stuff, and then... when it comes time to put real resources on the table, more or less making ourselves scarce and not pulling a lot of weight on the international programs. And, the one exception I can think of is support for Ukraine, which, we're more or less on par with the European nations on that one. Supplying arms and non-military support and running a training mission. But yeah, other than that, it's hard to think of a case where there was a global program where Canada really stepped up and took a leading role, or just put a lot of the resources into it.
Well, and Trudeau was only able to say to applause Canada is back in 2015 because the previous decade under Harper had seen a retreat of Canada from international institutions. We had done some one-off trade deals here and there with a number of countries in bilateral agreements, but Harper was not known for his world diplomacy.
Yeah, his foreign policy was much more of we're going to work with a smaller group of like-minded countries on issues of mutual concern and do some bilateral engagement, but the do a little bit sprinkled just everywhere. That's more of the liberal approach to stuff, and was not really seen there. And he had a fair bit of skepticism about the effectiveness and benefits of the UN. It driven, I think, in large part by the fact that the UN gave equal weights to the voices of authoritarian countries, dictatorships, and would do stuff like put Saudi Arabia on the Human Rights Council.
The interesting thing coming back to the speech is seeing the reaction in Canada, right? It's obviously very well received. You can find critics here and there, but overall it's one of those things. It's 90% of people are like, good job, sir, patting him on the back to varying levels, depending on your jersey. Liberals very happy, New Democrats pretty happy, some conservatives begrudgingly happy, or I guess jealous they didn't get to give it. And that leads to this very interesting thing that comes out today is Pierre Poilievre's response, that they say, we took our time. He wanted to think about this, reflect on it. I forget the exact words they used, but they wanted to go line by line and analyze it. And so he releases a long statement this afternoon as the Pierre Poilievre response, where he even congratulates him. He says it's well crafted and praises the general vibe of it. But kind of like I brought up, it's what's the action to follow? And I think that's kind of a universal critique, is it's all nice to have rhetoric and vibes, but what does that substantively mean? For the Conservatives, they list a bunch of, standard issues they want to see: more tax cuts, more domestic investment. They criticize the government for going to work more with China, even though they recognize some trade with China is necessary. They have this awkward bit in his response about, we got to maintain trade with the US because there will be another president eventually. It's not that exact language, but
yeah, in fairness, that there's it's more about how that the fact of geography, similar culture, similar legal systems, all that really pull trade towards the US rather than China. And that's something you see in a lot of trade relationships, is that a very big determinant of how much countries trade with each other is just how close are the two countries to each other, and how easy is it for business people in one country to understand and work with the businesses in another. And on those grounds, it's real hard to think of any pairs of countries that are going to have that mutual pull towards each other more than Canada and the US do on that. So it's, I think, a solid point on that. Nevertheless, there's obvious benefits to not being quite so reliant on the US.
Yeah, and to the conservative credit, they frame it in terms of jobs, right? They point out, due to the deep integration we have, 1 in 10 jobs is dependent on that trade, and jeopardizing that trade risks jobs. We want to stand for jobs, which, is smart enough framing, but I think a lot of Canadians are frustrated recently with the state of American geopolitics, spending a week threatening the sovereignty of Greenland, to the point where we're do we all need to send troops to Greenland? Do we need to have troops on our border? That was a conversation that happened this week. And nothing in here quite grapples with that. At the same time, the practical steps he wants to see, as they will table in the Canadian Sovereignty Act that they're going to propose, are the same things they've been ending the industrial carbon tax.
I'm pretty sure that the legislation that references is something they had proposed in a previous parliamentary sitting.
I think you're right, actually. But yeah.
So a lot of these are the same ideas they've been talking about. I mean, the carbon tax thing is obviously silly. Investing more in defense, building permanent bases in the Arctic, getting replacement submarines as quickly as possible. All of that makes sense, both within the general conservative framework and just things the country should be doing to strengthen our defenses.
I think where it kind of weakens is it doesn't actually... Carney's speech, and granted, was at Davos to a global audience, focused on, this tangible idea of middle power alliances and how to approach foreign affairs. The conservative approach here is entirely focused domestically. And electorally, that probably makes more sense. But it doesn't the conservatives were in a tough spot with this speech, right? Because the speech is one that wasn't a far left speech, even though it did criticize heavily the way the rules-based international order has been conveniently ignored when some of the stronger powers within that didn't want to follow it. But it's overall a speech you could see any prime minister from any party in Canada giving, with some subtle language changes.
Yeah, actually, I could have seen Harper giving that speech.
Yeah. And so the question is, how do you respond to that, especially when it's getting glowing praise? How do you get the limelight back to you? Because you can't just go, well, that was a shitty speech. It's no one believes that. And so they were trapped. It's a week before Pierre Poilievre faces the Conservative Party's leadership convention in Calgary. So he's also got to tiptoe around that because he's got to keep his job, which seems pretty likely, but weirder things have happened from Conservatives in Alberta than turfing a leader. Tricky situation for the Conservatives. They kind of got boxed out of the news. Like Don Davies had his own statement responding to this, but no one cares. No offense, Don.
Yeah. There's also a little noticeable that this one more or less mirrors what Michelle Rumpel-Gardner put out like a day or two earlier, that kind of hit those same points of, yeah, the general direction of the speech is good, but the real test is going to be implementation. Here's all the things that were talked about that have not actually come to fruition yet in Canada. Let's judge Carney on results rather than rhetoric, which, like I said, I think it's probably the best line they can land on this one. And it's also a fair point. For all of the talk of this stuff, it's more or less been a year and not a lot has actually gotten accomplished. Not quite a year for Carney, but like a year the country has been in this situation. And yeah, we said we were going to boost defense spending to 2% of GDP and then later 3.5%. What's actually happened on that front? We haven't signed any big purchase orders in that time. We've given a boost to military pay and started fixing some of the deferred maintenance on stuff, but in terms of rearmament, haven't seen much of that. There's been talk of whether or not we're going to go with Germany or South Korea to build submarines, but the last thing I saw on that was Carney's government just trying to do an auto industry shakedown as part of the deal on that, which hardly seems like a case of we're rushing towards getting workable equipment that is deployable soon. Specifically, they were more or less saying, if we're probably not going to go with you guys unless your auto sector opens plants in Canada. So that's a big question. We're going to remove interprovincial trade barriers. Yeah, the federal government's taken some steps on removing the specific ones in federal law and regulation, but we haven't heard anything about that in months. There's still a bunch of provincial ones in place we haven't seen movement on. There's only been announcements on major projects that were already in the queue. There hasn't been a big lift on getting new projects spun up on any of that. So, maybe the MOU with Alberta. There's just a lot of stuff that needed to happen quickly that we haven't actually seen a lot of evidence of happening.
Even the major projects that have been announced are largely re-announcements or,
nothing new.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Maybe the next few months will change that. Globally, there was one person who didn't like the speech. We already know that's Donald Trump, who had a couple bizarre posts. I think he tried to remind Mark Carney that, Canada lives because of the US, so watch your words, Mark. And then in one of the 50 plus posts he did last night, within the span of a couple hours, he told the internet that he's withdrawing the invitation to Canada to join the Board of Peace that he is establishing, as it quickly becomes the
Dictators Club?
Yeah, I was going to say the mirror universe, like Star Trek reference UN, right? It's all the bad guys.
Yeah, Argentina was the one that I actually saw on there that is a democracy. But yeah, the rest are places like Kazakhstan and Belarus, Vietnam.
Hungary's in there with Erdogan.
None of the countries that you're like, yes, this is a democracy in a well-run country that is.
I mean, Argentina's really current president is the guy who held the chainsaw on stage next to Elon Musk.
Yeah, the guy's a little nutty, and there's some signs that there's some signs the Argentinian economy is less of a basket case than it was. So he's doing some decent work on economic reforms there, but nobody looks at Argentina and be like, yes, that is a model we should follow.
Trump does, but
does he though?
Yeah, who knows?
I don't think. I'm not sure he's even aware of what's going on in Argentina.
I think Trump is also upset because, as we discussed last week, Mark Carney spent the previous week in China making deals. Right after we recorded, he announced the big capstone to that, which was we get Chinese EVs finally, and they get our canola, as well as peas and crabs and things. It's not tariff-free, and there's a big caveat that we're only getting 49,000 Chinese EVs a year. But overall, it seems like a pretty good deal for Carney's point. It both gets Canadian canola sold to China again at a favorable tariff rate, which is something that has been a big issue for prairie farmers, making sure that their product can be sold to one of the bigger markets in the world. And at the same time, doesn't bring so many Chinese EVs in that it poses a real substantial threat to domestic auto industries, because they quoted it as about 3% of new vehicles sold.
Yeah, the tariffs on canola have really been hurting the prairies for a while, so you will definitely have Strautmo and the other prairie premiers be very happy to see this deal in place. Doug Ford is notably less thrilled about it. I think I've already seen him call for boycotts on the Chinese EV.
Which is interesting because we don't even know how it's going to work. I think when people are saying, oh, they're going to sell Chinese EV here, they're saying, when people are hearing it, they're thinking, oh, they're going to sell BYD here and all of these Chinese brands. But realistically, it might just be the automakers that already sell here, including Tesla, who have factories in China, just bring those cars in. And so that might be the quota. It might just be there's a few Chinese-made Teslas and possibly Hondas on the lots across BC and maybe Ontario. And then, because it takes a lot of money to set up a distribution system to sell cars, especially if you're building dealerships and all of that. So I can't imagine some of the Chinese automakers are eager to come here to sell like a dozen cars a year per lot until those numbers shift. But, we'll
have to see. Similar policies in the past, admittedly in larger markets, have certainly spurred changes in how companies approach things. Interesting fact, like Lexus and the like higher end brands that are part of the big automakers, the ones like Toyota and Honda own, they exist because in the 80s, the Reagan administration did something similar for Japanese cars and put in a quota system. And as a result, all of those companies traded higher margin luxury brands to use those quota slots for.
So we're only going to get luxury BYDs, not the cheap ones.
That's quite a possibility.
They do say in this agreement that the goal is to have a big chunk of those be sub $35,000 in a few years. So I think they're trying to do the exact opposite, but I guess time will tell what effect this has on the domestic market. And I think there is still this like dream that they can attract a couple Chinese automakers to set up plants in Ontario to just serve the domestic market.
That already would have, if they'd done that before, would have been tariff exempt. So,
but they got to get the foothold first. So I think that's what they're aiming for. Interestingly, also announced today, which wasn't officially part of the deal, but it's weird timing, is the federal government has dropped a court case with TikTok. I think we talked about a year and a half ago it was November 2024, when Canada weirdly ordered TikTok to shut down its business in Canada, but could still operate the app. So basically it was just like, you need to fire Canadian workers, but you can still access Canadian consumers.
Yeah, it was one of the many, many incoherent decisions that the Trudeau government made.
And so TikTok sued because they went, we don't feel we had a good hearing here. And that was set to be heard by the federal court. And it was announced today the federal government has reached a deal and offered to send it back to another review by the industry minister, which seems like it won't be as onerous on TikTok as it was. And in the meantime, TikTok's employees get to keep their jobs, I guess. So those offices never did close.
That whole thing was such a farce. It made no sense to cite security concerns, which are very real and legitimate concerns about the security of TikTok, both the data and the ability to manipulate the algorithm for influence operations, and then just not do anything to actually restrict access in the country, but just close the office where the lawyers and the ad salespeople for the country sit. But yeah, just before we move off of the China deal, there's one other thing I just want to flag here that didn't get a huge amount of attention. I saw it covered in the hub and not much else. There's also a bit buried in the joint statement about how the two countries are going to provide mutual support and convenience for media to work in each other's countries, and that raises a whole bunch of interesting questions about how reciprocal the deal actually is, because as I'm sure everyone knows, China is not a place that is well known for press freedom or being conducive to foreign media, and it seems highly unlikely that as part of this deal, China is going to change its whole approach to media and information control on this, which could quite likely result in Canada doing work to help Chinese state media and getting nothing back in return.
Hey, we also may get visa-free access to China, though. Apparently, President Xi has promised visa-free access for Canadians traveling to China, which...
Great. So when the Chinese government randomly detains you in the next diplomatic spat, at least you don't have to worry about the visa paperwork.
But overall, I mean, Canadians, I think, want to see trade diversification, and this is what it looks like. I'll be curious to see how this develops over time, but overall, it's a lot more trade with China than we've had in quite a while. So, and for the most part, I think it was pretty well received. Like, not universally, not like his speech, but it's been a good couple weeks for Mark Carney.
The Conservatives were pretty critical on this, largely on the grounds that China's not exactly been a good actor, has been a country that has thrown around its weight in trade to try and extract political concessions from Canada, has, as alluded to earlier, kidnapped Canadian citizens to try and lean on Canada to do certain things. So there's an understandable degree of skepticism about just how much Canada should throw in with China on this. I don't actually think the trade deal alone is going to dramatically shift that, but dramatically shift Canada's orientation towards China. But the concerns about the Chinese regime are entirely fair and should have an airing as part of this debate.
And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.